The wind came in sharp that evening of November, 1893, scraping the eaves like a dull knife against bone. The sky over the Montana plains was the color of cold iron, and the last light of day had turned to smoke behind the ridgeline. May Ellis split a log on the third swing. The axe head struck sparks, her palms raw and red beneath the wool. The sound of the impact carried through the emptiness, echoing off the frozen barn. Every breath she took left a trail of frost that hung there, waiting before vanishing. Behind her, the house leaned slightly, the roof whining at the joints, as if remembering the storm that had taken her husband 2 winters ago on Cotton Ridge. She hadn't spoken his name in months, but the grave cross out front still caught her eye when the light fell right. From the west, hooves broke the stillness, steady, heavy, unhurried. She turned, gripping the axe handle. The horse came first, black and soaked, mane stringing rain. Then the man. Jonah Hale, the rancher from 3 miles north, shoulders broad as the barn door, coat lined in dust and sleet. He tipped his hat once, rain sliding off the brim, and for a second his gaze held hers, without weight, without apology. "You'll freeze out here before Christmas," he said, voice low as the horizon. "This wind doesn't care what name's carved on your cross." May kept her stance, breath white in the air. "I manage." He studied the splintered logs, the leaning house, the line of smoke that barely reached above the chimney. Then he dismounted, boots sinking into mud, horse snorting steam. "Maybe, but managing ain't the same as living." His hands were bare when he said it, large, cracked, scarred from rope and work. "By the time the river freezes," he added, "you'll have my son growing inside you." The words landed heavy and unreal. For a heartbeat, the wind stopped. She could hear the flap of the porch, lantern, the tick of cooling metal from her axe. Her chest burned, half fury, half disbelief. She set the blade upright in the stump. That's no offer to make to a woman burying her past. "It ain't an offer," he said. "It's a vow." Something flickered behind his calm. Not arrogance, not pity, but the quiet knowledge of a man who'd outlasted storms. He didn't move closer, just let the sentence hang there between them, like the smell of pine smoke and snow. When the wind rose again, it carried a single sound, the faint clang of a loose shingle, tapping like a heartbeat above the porch. Jonah looked up. "That roof'll come down with the first real gale," he murmured. "I'll be back in the morning, if you'll have me fix it." May wanted to answer sharp, to send him back to his horse and his strange prophecy, but her mouth stayed dry. She only nodded once, curt, more to the cold than to him. He touched the brim of his hat again, mounted coal, and turned toward the thinning light. The wind took him fast, swallowing the rhythm of hooves until there was nothing left but the hiss of grass under frost. May stood there until the ache reached her wrists, the axe handle still warm where his eyes had lingered. She carried the wood inside, stacked it neat beside the stove, and lit the lamp. Its yellow pool spread across the floorboards, catching on the framed photograph above the mantel. Thomas Ellis, grinning in his cavalry coat, 2 winters and a world away. For a moment, she let the flame blur the edges of his face. Then she went to the window. Outside, the grave marker leaned in the wind, and far beyond it, the black ridge rose. Cotton Ridge, the place that had kept its dead. A gust rattled the panes, the lamp flickered. She thought she saw movement at the fence. Only the shadow of a horse gone now, maybe a trick of light. Still, something in her chest shifted. She pressed a hand to the cold glass. "He won't come back, Thomas," she whispered. But someone did. The wind caught her voice and pulled it apart. From somewhere near the roof, a single drop of water fell, slow, deliberate, into the tin bucket by the hearth. Outside, night gathered its coat of frost. Inside, May's breath trembled in the half-dark, and for the first time in months, she didn't pray for morning. The lantern flame tilted in the draft, flaring gold, and through that brief brightness, she thought she saw, or imagined, the outline of a man turning once in the distance, watching the house before riding on. Then the light steadied, and she was alone again. Morning came late to the plains. The sun never truly rose, just pressed a pale smear of light against the fog. Frost turned the grass white and brittle. Each step May took toward the barn snapped like thin glass beneath her boots. The world smelled of iron and ash. Something moved near the fence line, a shape against the bleached horizon. She thought at first it was Jonah, come early with his stubborn promise. But as she stepped closer, the sound shifted. A sharp exhale, then a low, broken whinny. A horse, wild, ribs showing through a hide the color of old chestnuts, stumbled toward her yard, blood streaking one flank. May froze. The animal's breath rose in plumes, and its eyes rolled wide with pain and fright. She should have fetched the rifle, should have chased it off before it spooked the chickens. But instead she whispered, "Easy, girl," and set down her bucket. Her voice cracked the way thawing wood does when the sun first hits it. The horse swayed, then stopped, trembling. May reached for a rope, looped it softly around the neck, and guided it toward the shelter beside the barn. The wound was deep, a jagged gash along the shoulder, maybe from barbed wire or a mountain cat. She poured water from the well, hands stiff and raw, and washed away the blood. The animal flinched, but didn't bolt. "Thistle," she murmured, "you'll do." The name came without thinking, pulled from somewhere softer than she'd meant to show. When she was almost done, a knock came at the gate. 2 slow raps, familiar now. Jonah stood there, hat dripping, coat dusted with frost. Cole stamped behind him, snorting mist. He looked past her to the horse. "You always take in strays?" May straightened. "It wandered in." He nodded once, then glanced toward the house. "Rate medium." "Roof's worse than I thought." Without waiting for her leave, he walked to the porch, eyes tracing each crack of the boards. The sound of his boots was steady, heavier than the wind. "I said I'd come back," he told her. "Best let me work while there's light." May crossed her arms, torn between pride and exhaustion. I didn't hire you. You didn't have to. He pulled a hammer from his saddlebag, found the ladder by the barn wall, and climbed. The wood creaked under his weight, and soon the steady rhythm of nails began to echo across the yard. She stood by the fence, hands tucked under her shawl, watching him work against the gray sky. There was something relentless about him, not cruel, just sure. Each swing of the hammer seemed to steady the air around them. When Nora Pike came by around noon with a basket of preserves, she found May still watching. "You're letting him?" Nora asked, eyebrow raised. May didn't look away. "Roof needed fixing." Nora smiled, faint and knowing. "So does the heart sometimes." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of pitch and pine from the shingles. May didn't answer. She took the jar of jam and went inside. By late afternoon, Jonah was gone. The ladder leaned against the eave, the nails packed neatly back in their tin. The sky had begun to bruise purple, and the first flakes of snow drifted down. May lit the stove, fed Thistle some grain, and for the first time in weeks, didn't shiver. When she went to check the pails by the wall, she stopped short. The corner where the roof had leaked, where a steady drip had kept her awake many nights, was dry. A fresh plank had been fitted there, its edges planed smooth. He must have done it after dusk, quietly, without asking, without expecting thanks. Time 800 pounds. May pressed her palm to the dry board. The warmth of the day still lingered faintly in it. She whispered, almost to herself, "Thank you," and heard the sound vanish into the rafters. Outside, the wind picked up again, running its fingers through the prairie grass. The smell of thaw and smoke mixed in the air, the kind that warned of a long winter coming. She turned toward the table. Her gaze caught on the wedding ring of Thomas, hanging from its black ribbon near the lamp. For a heartbeat, she thought of Jonah's rough hands, the way his voice had filled the yard that morning. The ring swung gently in the draft, ticking against the glass. She opened the drawer beneath it, where she kept her stationery and a single broken pencil. Her fingers hesitated, hovering over the paper. Outside, the horse whickered softly in its sleep. The patched roof didn't leak. The wind had lost its knife's edge. May sat down, the faint creak of the chair echoing in the hush, and began to write, though she didn't yet know to whom. Rain had come and gone 3 days straight, fine as dust and just as cold. The yard was a patchwork of mud and straw, and the smell of wet wood clung to everything. May moved between barn and porch, checking feed, mending a fence hinge, trying not to notice the silence left when Jonah's hammering stopped echoing from the roof. The quiet now felt heavier than before, like the land itself was waiting for something to be said. The horse Thistle limped less each morning. When May brushed its coat, flakes of dried blood gave way to a new gloss of chestnut. The animal's breath rose warm and steady, and May found herself murmuring nonsense just to hear a voice in the air. On the 4th day, the sound of hooves returned, that same measured rhythm. Jonah came riding through the drizzle, hat pulled low, coat soaked through the shoulders. He dismounted before she could speak and set a small bundle on the porch. Nails, rope, a can of oil. "You planning to fix the whole county?" she asked, half teasing, half guarded. He shrugged. "Starting with what needs fixing most." May looked away. "You already patched the roof." "Then the door," he said, pushing it open. The hinge groaned in protest. "It's a long winter. Weak doors invite trouble." She stood aside, letting him pass. His presence filled the room like a second fire, quiet, but warming everything near it. As he worked, the house seemed to come alive. The creak of nails finding home, the steady scrape of his knife trimming the swollen edge of the wood. May brewed coffee and poured 2 cups, the simple act awkward as prayer. Jonah wiped his hands before taking the mug. "You ought to think on it," he said, eyes on the steam. "Think on what?" "On not weathering this alone." May held the cup tighter. "Rate medium pitch first." "You mean marriage?" He nodded once as if the word itself were too heavy for speech. "I'm not ready." "No one ever is," he said, "but the pass'll close soon. When it does, it'll just be us and the snow till spring." His tone wasn't pleading. It was the even, factual voice of a man used to storms and fences giving way. Still, something inside her flared. Fear, maybe, or the ache of being seen. "I don't need saving." He met her gaze. "Didn't say you did. Said you might want a roof that don't leak, a table with 2 chairs, and someone who knows when to keep quiet." The wind at the windows moaned, slow and hollow. She could smell rain on his coat, rawhide and cedar smoke. Behind him, the lamp caught on the wet edge of his jawline, and for a moment she saw not just a rancher, but a man who'd been alone too long. May set her cup down. "You think fixing things means owning them." "Not owning," he said softly, "keeping them alive." The words settled somewhere beneath her ribs. He turned toward the door, as if giving her space to breathe. "I'll be driving cattle downriver tomorrow. If you want this house to be more than 4 walls and echoes, I'll come back by week's end. Bring a preacher, if that's how you want it done." She wanted to tell him no, to send him back into the rain, to stay wrapped in the comfort of grief where nothing new could hurt. But the image of Thistle, standing patient in the barn despite its wound, rose in her mind. Survival wasn't pride. It was endurance. Jonah took a small pouch from his coat and laid it on the table. "For when you can't sleep," he said. "Feverfew, willow bark, ginger. Works better than prayer." When he left, his footsteps faded slow down the muddy path. The door's new hinge closed without a sound. May sat for a while, listening to the drip of rain easing off the eaves. Her hands smelled of coffee and pine resin. On the table, the little pouch waited, humble, earnest, like everything he'd done so far. She opened it and ran a finger through the dried leaves, their scent sharp and clean. Something inside her eased. Outside, Thistle whinnied once, low and calm. May looked toward the window, where the fields blurred into the horizon. The ring of Thomas hung on its ribbon beside the lamp, catching the firelight in small, flickering circles. She whispered, 1 week. not sure if she meant it for the dead or the living. The wind pressed against the house, testing the new door, and passed on. Sunday dawned thin and colorless, the kind of light that never quite decides whether to stay. The road into town was still half frozen, ruts glittering with ice, and May Ellis rode side saddle on Thistle, her breath trailing like smoke. Beside her, Jonah Hale kept an even pace, reins loose, shoulders broad beneath his wool coat. He didn't speak, and she didn't ask where he'd found the white carnation pinned to his lapel. The town was quiet, just the sound of a blacksmith's hammer far off and a church bell calling late souls to prayer. Reverend Whitcomb waited by the door of the small wooden chapel, smiling in the way men do when they're both kind and uncertain. "Two hearts braver than the weather," he said, ushering them in. Inside, the pews smelled of dust and candle wax. A few neighbors had gathered, Nora Pike holding a small bouquet, old Mrs. Landry from the mill, one or two cowhands who nodded politely. It wasn't much of a wedding, but it was enough to make the place feel full. May's hands trembled when she pulled off her gloves. Jonah noticed, took them gently, and for a moment she felt the rough heat of his skin, like bark warmed by sun. When the Reverend asked for vows, Jonah's voice came steady and low. "I'll keep her fed, safe, and never hungry for peace." Simple words, heavy with truth. May's reply was smaller, but sure. "And I'll make this house a home." Then came the signing. Reverend Whitcomb spread open the register, its pages lined with faded names and careful loops of ink. May wrote her own easily. Her father had taught her letters before the war. When she slid the book toward Jonah, the air changed. He gripped the pen as though it might bite. His jaw tightened, his thumb smudging the page. The room went still. May caught the small tremor in his hand, the way his eyes narrowed to make sense of the lines. After a long breath, he scrawled something, barely a mark, and pushed the pen back. The Reverend smiled, too kind to note it aloud. But May saw. Outside, snow began to fall, soft as ash. The crowd drifted away, leaving behind the smell of wool and smoke. Jonah helped her onto Thistle, then mounted Cole, and together they rode through the falling white. Back at the ranch, he carried her over the threshold like an instinct rather than a gesture. The fire was already lit, throwing amber light on the walls. On the table sat 2 mugs and a loaf of bread, Nora's gift, wrapped in cloth. They ate in near silence. Then, while the wind hummed through the rafters, May took the pen from the mantel and laid it between them. "You don't read cursive, do you?" she asked quietly. Jonah stared at the fire. "Never learned right. My pa said words weren't much good against a drought." "Why hide it?" He met her eyes. "Because a man without letters gets treated like a fool, even when he's built fences straight as the sunrise." May said nothing for a long time. Then she reached for the Bible on the shelf and opened to a page at random. "Start with this, 1 verse." Jonah shook his head, embarrassed. "Then your own name," she said softly. "No one's watching." He hesitated, then took the pen tracing slow over the curve of the J. She guided his hand through the rest, their fingers brushing, the ink trembling but clear. When he finished, she whispered, "You see? Not so different from driving a nail. Steady hand, honest aim." He smiled then, small and surprised. "Guess I'll keep practicing." The fire popped, throwing sparks into the dark. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, but the new roof held fast, no longer leaking. Later, as she banked the fire, May glanced at him. This man who'd come into her life like a storm and now sat reading letters one by one under her breath. The world beyond their door had turned white and soundless. She felt the first thread of calm since Thomas's death, a quiet she could believe in. Jonah looked up. "We'll ride to town again come spring," he said. "File the land papers in both our names. It's only right." May nodded, though something inside her still resisted the idea of belonging to anyone again. A gust blew against the house, making the lantern flicker. She went to the window, watching the snow thicken. Far off, through the swirling gray, a single rider crossed the ridge, too distant to name, but the sight stirred a faint unease. Jonah joined her, laying a hand on her shoulder. "Storm's coming," he said. She nodded, but her gaze stayed fixed on that moving shadow. Outside, the wind picked up its howl, dragging the horizon into white. The wind stilled after sundown, leaving the world wrapped in its own hush. Snow lay deep along the fence line, soft as flour, glowing faintly under the lantern hung by the porch. Inside, the house had taken on a new kind of quiet, no longer hollow, just listening. May Ellis stirred the pot above the fire, the smell of cornmeal and broth threading through the room. Jonah Hale sat near the hearth, boots off, sleeves rolled, a knife in his hand and a block of pale birch balanced across his knee. His movements were slow, deliberate, the shavings curling away like thin ribbons of moonlight. He hadn't said much since the wedding, but in the small sounds, the scrape of steel on wood, the soft rattle of her ladle against the pot, something between them had begun to breathe. "You work even when there's nothing left to fix," she said, half smiling. Jonah looked up, eyes catching the glow of the fire. "Hands remember what the heart forgets. Best keep 'em busy." May ladled the stew into 2 bowls, set one in front of him. The warmth from the bowl fogged the air between them. "So what's that gonna be?" "A spoon," he said simply. "For you." She frowned, but gently. "I already have spoons. Not one I made." They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the storm muttering beyond the shutters. After a while, Jonah set down his bowl, took the half-carved spoon, and held it up to the firelight. "See that?" he said, tracing the curve of the handle. "Birch don't splinter if you work with the grain. Push against it, and it'll break clean through." May watched the smooth line where his thumb rested. "You think that's true for people, too?" He met her eyes, the corner of his mouth tilting. "Only if they want to stay whole." She didn't answer, but she understood. The spoon gleamed softly, its edges catching the light like a sliver of dawn. Later, when the fire had burned low, May brought out the old tin of coffee, the one she'd saved for special days. She ground the beans, the scent filling the room rich and dark. Jonah leaned back, arms crossed, watching her with quiet ease. "Never thought I'd marry again," she said without looking up. "Neither did I." "What changed?" "Didn't like how silence sounded anymore." She smiled faintly, poured him a cup. Their fingers brushed when he took it. Warm skin, calloused and certain. Outside, thistles snorted in the barn, restless but alive. May's gaze drifted to the window. Flakes whirled past like ash from an unseen fire. The storm hadn't yet broken, but she could feel it gathering. An edge under the air, waiting. Jonah stood and went to his coat. "Got something for you." From an inner pocket, he pulled a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. When she unfolded it, a familiar weight slid into her palms. A weathered hymn book, the corners frayed, her mother's handwriting faint along the inside cover. May's breath caught. "Where did you—" "Found it in a trader's crate in town. Cost me near a whole week's wages. Figured it ought to come home." She traced the ink, the faint scent of cedar and dust rising from the pages. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." She closed the book gently and placed it near the lamp. "You don't even read these words." He shrugged. "Don't need to. I know what they mean." The room seemed to grow smaller then, not from closeness, but from quiet. She stepped closer, the firelight playing across her face, and rested a hand on his arm. "Thank you," she whispered. He looked down at her hand, then at her. "You're welcome, May." The snow outside thickened until the windows glowed white. The fire roared, then sighed, settling into its slow rhythm. Jonah picked up the finished spoon, smoothed its curve with his thumb, and laid it on the table between them. "For when spring comes," he said. May looked at it. Simple, honest, unadorned, and felt something in her chest loosen. Not joy, not yet, but the first warmth after a long frost. When the wind shifted, the lamp flickered, shadows sliding across the wall. Jonah moved to check the shutters, but May caught the faint sound of hooves, distant, fading, like a memory trying to find its way home. "Someone out there?" she asked. He shook his head. "Just the wind playing tricks." Still, she lingered by the window long after he'd banked the fire. The storm held its breath, the night heavy with snow. Somewhere beyond that white silence, a single rider crossed the ridge again. Or maybe he'd never left. May turned back to Jonah, who was already half asleep by the hearth, the carved spoon resting in his hand. She blew out the lamp. Darkness folded around them, gentle as a blanket. And in that hush, warm, fragile, and true, she realized she no longer feared the sound of a man's breathing beside her. By noon, the world had gone white again, a hard, breathless kind of white that swallowed every color and sound. The wind cut across the plains like it meant to take something with it. May Ellis pulled her shawl tighter as she stepped onto the porch, her boots sinking into a crust of frozen snow. The air tasted of iron and distance. She was bringing in the wash when the sound of hooves rose from the road, a rhythm too sharp, too certain. Not Jonah's. This horse came fast, hard, like it carried bad news on its back. The rider dismounted before the gate creaked. A man in a dark coat, hat pulled low, boots polished to the shine of law offices and debt ledgers. Silas Blackthorne. The name slid across her mind like a cold knife. She'd seen him once before, in town, years ago. The man Thomas had gone to when the last harvest failed. Mrs. Hale now, isn't it? His voice carried the weight of paper and signatures, not dirt or wind. Congratulations on the new union. May's fingers tightened on the railing. You rode far to deliver pleasantries? Far enough to collect what's owed. He pulled a folded document from his coat, edges crisp despite the weather. A note signed by Thomas Ellis, your late husband, 6 months before his passing. Principal $1,000 with interest accruing. May's throat went dry. That's impossible. We paid what we owed. Apparently not all of it. He smiled, but his eyes didn't. Under Dakota marital law, the debt transfers to the surviving spouse, or her current husband. The wind pushed between them, snapping the paper in his hand like a whip. I'll see your husband about it, Silas said. Pitch first. He's the sort to settle fast. May's voice steadied, though her stomach twisted. You'll see him when I do. He's driving cattle south. Then tell him I'll return in 10 days. If the amount's unpaid, the property and its assets, meaning livestock and structures, become collateral. The court's patient, Mrs. Hale, but not sentimental. He tipped his hat, turned, and rode off, the snow swallowing him whole before she could find words sharp enough to throw after him. Inside, the house seemed smaller. The hymn book on the shelf caught the gray light, its worn cover like the calm face of an old friend who'd seen too much. She reached for it, then let her hand fall. By evening, Jonah came home, his coat rimmed with ice. She met him at the door, the paper still trembling in her hands. He says Thomas owed him money, $1,000. Jonah read it once, jaw working slow. Paper's clean, ink's fresh, too clean. What do we do? He folded the note neatly and set it on the table. We wait. Sometimes snakes show their heads if you keep still long enough. May wanted to believe him, but the words $1,000 kept echoing like a church bell with no end. He'll take everything, she whispered. The roof, the land. Jonah stepped close, snow melting down his collar. He'll take nothing that's ours to give. Something in his tone, quiet, measured, calmed the part of her that was already mourning things not yet lost. Still, she saw the worry behind his eyes, the math turning over in his head. When darkness fell, they sat by the fire without talking. The wind scraped the windows, rattled the latch. In the barn, Thistle stamped and huffed, uneasy. May went to check, lantern in hand. The light swung across the stalls, catching the soft sheen of the mare's new-grown coat. The horse blinked, calm again once she spoke its name. She lingered there longer than needed, the smell of hay and warm hide easing her heart. Outside, the snow had stopped. The silence that followed was the kind that listens. From the doorway, Jonah called softly, "Come in before you freeze." She turned, the lantern painting him in gold and shadow. 10 days, she said. He nodded, eyes unreadable. Then we'll make them count. The next morning the sky cleared, sharp blue over white. The house looked peaceful, but beneath its stillness something had shifted, the kind of tension that makes even the floorboards hold their breath. As Jonah saddled Cole to ride into town, May touched his arm. "You'll tell me what you find." He managed a faint smile. "If there's truth to find." Then he was gone, leaving only the creak of leather and the distant jangle of a bridle fading into snowlight. May stood watching until the plane swallowed him. The wind rose again, catching a loose scrap of the debt notice on the porch and sending it skittering across the yard. It stopped against the cross marking Thomas's grave, ink stark against white drift. She went to pick it up, but hesitated. The paper trembled, half buried, like it wanted to stay hidden. Behind her, the house sighed. The roof Jonah had mended groaned under fresh frost, strong but not unbreakable. She turned back toward the door, lantern light flickering through the window, and for a moment she could have sworn she saw movement out by the ridge, a dark horse standing still in the distance, watching. Then the wind shifted, and the ridge was empty again. The storm rolled in without warning, thick clouds gathering like bruises above the horizon. By dusk, the sky had turned to slate, and the air was raw with that particular stillness that comes before everything breaks loose. May Ellis stood at the window, her reflection trembling in the glass as the first flakes struck, fat and heavy. Out beyond the fence, the prairie disappeared into gray. She'd spent the day pacing, trying to read the document Silas left behind, her lips shaping each word as if they could turn the ink true or false. The numbers swam on the page, cruel in their neatness. Every time she blinked, she saw Thomas's handwriting on the old grocery lists he used to leave by the stove, slanted, messy, alive. The signature on the note was too perfect. By the time Jonah Hale returned, night had already folded over the plains. His coat was frozen stiff, his beard laced with ice. He hung his hat by the door, shaking snow from his shoulders. "Town's near empty," he said. "Even the saloon closed early. Reverend's sending a wire to Marshal Hayes. He'll look into the note." May handed him a towel. "And if it's real?" "Then I'll pay what's due," Jonah said simply, wiping his hands. "But it won't be with fear." She watched him cross to the hearth, feeding the fire until the room glowed gold and alive. "You'd sell the herd?" "If it meant keeping this house standing, yes." May swallowed hard. "I can't let you do that for me." "You're not letting me. I'm choosing." The wind shrieked then, shaking the windows, flinging sleet against the walls. Thistle cried from the barn, the sound half swallowed by the gale. May started for the door, but Jonah caught her wrist. "She'll stand," he said. "You go out now, you won't." She hesitated, then nodded, heart hammering. They moved closer to the fire, the light catching the edges of Jonah's jaw, the tension in his shoulders. For a while neither spoke. The storm filled every silence. Then May did something she hadn't planned. She reached for the hymn book he'd given back to her, laid it open on the table, and pulled a piece of charcoal from the stove's edge. "If we're going to fight this, you'll need to read what they send you, every word." Jonah frowned. "Now?" "There's no better time." He hesitated, then sat across from her. She drew a crooked line under the first verse. "The Lord is my keeper. The frost shall not claim me." "Start there," she said. His voice came halting, low. "The Lord is my keeper." He stumbled over keeper, corrected himself. Each word was a nail driven straight, slow. May smiled faintly. "Good." They went on verse by verse until the lantern burned low. The rhythm of his voice softened the storm's fury, turned the sound of wind into something bearable. Every mistake became a new chance to steady his hands. When he reached the end, he looked up, half proud, half shy. "Didn't think I'd ever say words like that out loud," he murmured. May closed the book, her fingers brushing his. "Then don't stop now." Outside, thunder cracked across the plain, rolling for miles. The shutters banged once, twice, and Jonah rose to secure them. When he returned, the stormlight flared white through the seams, casting strange shapes along the ceiling, shadows of branches, or maybe riders crossing unseen. He poured 2 cups of coffee, set one before her. "Whatever comes, we'll face it." She nodded, staring into the fire. "You always sound so certain." "I'm not. I just don't see what fear's ever built that lasted." The words settled deep. She opened her mouth to reply, but a sharp knock rattled the door. Both froze. Jonah stepped forward, hand on the rifle by the frame. "Who's there?" Only wind answered. Then a scrap of paper slid under the door. Thin, damp, marked with ink. May picked it up carefully. The telegram read, "Eddie Crane suspected forgery. Stay alert. Marshal Hayes arriving soon." Jonah exhaled, tension loosening from his shoulders. That's the start of something. May folded the paper tight. Then we wait. Outside, lightning split the sky, lighting the whole prairie for a breath. The storm was far from over, but for the first time since Silas had come, the house no longer felt like prey. Jonah sat beside her again, and she leaned just enough for their shoulders to touch. He was warm, solid as the wall itself. Together they listened to the storm spend itself against the roof he'd built, every gust weaker than the last. When at last the thunder rolled north, the silence it left was almost tender. May whispered, "The frost shall not claim me." Jonah answered, "Nor you." And for the first time, she believed it. Morning crawled out of the snow like something tired. The storm had blown itself thin, leaving behind a plain washed pale and brittle. Every fence post wore a cap of frost. The air shimmered cold enough to break. May Ellis stood on the porch, her breath a slow fog, watching Jonah Hale saddle Cole. Neither spoke for a while. The silence between them was filled with everything they didn't need to say. 6 days, she murmured. Jonah nodded. Plenty if truth rides faster than lies. He swung onto the saddle, the leather creaking under his weight. Marshal Hayes wired again. He's following a trail from Deadwood. Name of Eddie Crane showed up in a pawnhouse ledger. Could take a day, could take 3. May folded her arms against the cold. And Silas? Jonah looked toward the horizon, where the snow turned blue under the light. He'll be back soon enough. His voice carried a calm that made her chest ache, quiet certainty drawn from stubborn hope. When he rode off, the hoofbeats faded slow, leaving her with the whisper of wind through frozen grass, the sound of an empty world waiting. By midday, Nora Pike arrived, face red from the cold, a loaf of bread under one arm and worry in her eyes. You heard the news? May shook her head. They saw a rider fitting Silas's build on the North Road. He's been asking after your herd, saying he'll collect in person. May felt her stomach turn. Jonah's gone to meet the marshal. Then you're here alone, Nora said. You shouldn't be. I've been alone before. Nora's tone softened. Not like this. Time 700 Malms. They shared coffee by the fire, the quiet full of fear they both pretended not to feel. When Nora left, May checked the rifle twice, though she'd never been fond of shooting. The clock ticked steady, the sound too loud in the small room. At dusk, hooves again, steady this time, measured. Her heart kicked, expecting Jonah. Instead, Silas rode through the gate, hat dusted with frost, lips pulled in a half-smile that never reached his eyes. Evening, Mrs. Hale, he drawled. Fine night for settling accounts. May stepped outside before he could dismount. You're early. I find time keeps better when money's involved. He nodded toward the barn. Fine stock you've got there. Shame to lose it. You'll get nothing till the marshal speaks. Silas tilted his head. Marshal's 3 days out. Paper says 6 left. You do the math. I'll wait. His smile thinned. Then pray your new husband rides faster than I think he can. He turned his horse with a snap of the reins and disappeared into the blue-gray dark. May watched until the sound of hoofbeats died, the echo crawling under her skin. That night, Jonah didn't return. She sat by the fire with the hymn book open, reading the same verse he'd learned, tracing each letter he'd sounded out with his rough, patient voice. The lamp burned low, smoke curling toward the rafters like thin fingers of doubt. Every creak outside made her glance toward the window. Once she thought she saw a shadow cross the yard, too tall for wind, too slow for ghost. But it passed before she could be sure. When exhaustion came, she let her head rest against the table. The world blurred into dreams, the roof leaking again, a child's laughter somewhere distant, Jonah's hand reaching through snow. At dawn, she woke to the sharp knock of boots on wood. Jonah stood there, face lined with cold and dust, eyes fierce. He's coming back, he said, dropping a damp telegram on the table. The ink had bled at the edges, but the message was clear. Eddie Crane caught. Confessed to forging signatures for Silas Blackthorne. Marshall and Root. Hold him if you can. May's hands trembled. Then it's over? Almost. Jonah poured himself coffee, shoulders slumping from days of travel. Silas doesn't know yet. We keep it that way till the marshal rides in. What if he finds out first? Jonah looked toward the window, where the snow reflected a strange blue light. Then I'll give him truth the hard way. May reached for his arm. No violence. He nodded once, though his jaw stayed tight. Only what's needed. They spent the day in quiet readiness. Jonah checked the rifle, the fence, the horses. May baked bread she couldn't eat, her hands moving without feeling. The sky stayed gray, heavy with more snow. When evening came, she stood by the door, heart pounding with every wind gust, every creak of the floorboards. The air felt charged, electric, as if the world were holding its breath. Then, faint but clear through the cold, came the sound of a horse galloping hard, fast, relentless, cutting through the stillness like a knife through cloth. Jonah met her eyes. He's here. The wind carried the echo long after the shape appeared on the ridge. A single rider, coat flaring behind him like a dark flag, heading straight for their gate. The next morning broke brittle and colorless, the kind of dawn that feels more like a warning than a beginning. Frost glazed the windows. The plains were a frozen ocean stretching in every direction. May Ellis watched from the porch as Jonah Hale saddled Cole with the quiet precision of a man heading towards something he couldn't avoid. He checked the rifle once, then set it back inside. "No guns today," he said. "Not unless he draws first." May stood in the doorway, coat pulled tight. "He'll come armed." Jonah gave a slow nod. "Let him. Truth's a better weapon than lead if the town's watching." They rode together to Cedar Hollow, the nearest settlement, a line of buildings leaning against the wind like weary men. The church bell tolled once, dull and heavy. Word had spread fast. By the time they reached McCready's saloon, half the town had gathered, faces drawn in the pale cold. Even Reverend Whitcomb was there, hat in hand, eyes steady. Silas Blackthorne stood by the bar, coat brushed clean, gloves immaculate. His smile came sharp. "Mr. Hale, I was beginning to think you'd lost your nerve." Jonah's boots thudded against the floorboards as he stepped forward. "You've been stealing from widows and burying your lies in paper." Silas's chuckle was soft, polished. "That's a dangerous accusation without proof." Jonah turned to Reverend Whitcomb. "We have proof." He held up the telegram, creased, water-stained, but legible. "Eddie Crane's in custody," he confessed. A murmur rippled through the crowd, the sound of something shifting, like the wind changing direction. Silas's jaw tightened, though his voice stayed calm. "A confession's a fragile thing, Mr. Hale, and your word means little without—" "Without what?" Jonah cut in. "Without a lawyer? Or without fear to silence me?" Silas's eyes flicked toward the crowd, then back. You talk big for a man who signs his name like a child." The insult hung in the air. A few in the crowd flinched. May's breath caught. But Jonah didn't move, didn't even blink. Slowly, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded paper. It was the letter May had written for him to practice with, the one she'd made him read out loud by the fire. He opened it, his voice deep and rough as he began to read. "A home ain't made of boards and nails. It's made of hands that keep building, even when the storm won't quit." His voice trembled once, then steadied. "If the world asks who we are, we'll answer with what we've built." When he finished, the saloon was silent except for the pop of the stove. Silas shifted, his confidence cracking like thin ice. "Nice speech," he said finally, "but it won't save your land." At that moment, the door blew open with a rush of cold air. Marshal Hayes stepped in, snow on his coat, badge catching the firelight. "You're right, Mr. Blackthorne," he said evenly. "That speech didn't save their land." He held up a packet of papers sealed with the federal crest. "This did." Silas's face drained of color. "Eddie Crane's confession," the marshal continued, "signed and witnessed, along with bank records proving you paid him to forge documents. You'll stand trial in Rapid City." The crowd stirred. Someone muttered, "Told you." Another spat tobacco into the stove. Silas opened his mouth, but Jonah stepped closer. "You'll get your day in court," he said quietly, "but not another one in this town." For a heartbeat, the only sound was the marshal's cuffs snapping shut. Then Silas's voice rose, bitter and small. "You think you've won, rancher? The world's full of men like me. Paper always beats sweat." Jonah met his eyes. "Not today." Hayes led him out, the crowd parting like water. Outside, the wind had died, the air sharp and still. May stood at Jonah's side, heart pounding as the sound of hooves faded down the road. For the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Reverend Whitcomb stepped forward, eyes kind. "Justice done then?" Jonah nodded. "Justice started." The Reverend smiled faintly. "That's enough for one morning." May exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath the whole time. Jonah's hand found hers, not for comfort, but for confirmation that both still stood. They left the saloon together, the townsfolk trailing behind, voices low with relief and gossip. The snow had softened under the noon light. Thaw was near. At the hitching post, May paused. "It's over?" Jonah looked toward the horizon. "Almost. There's still winter to finish." They mounted and rode home through the open plain. Above them, a hawk circled once, then vanished into the sun. The day after the arrest broke warmer, a strange kindness in the air. Snowmelt dripped from the eaves in slow, steady rhythm, and the earth beneath the drifts began to show through, dark, breathing again. May Ellis woke to the sound of thaw, that gentle music of water finding its way home. Jonah Hale was already outside when she stepped onto the porch. He stood by the fence, sleeves rolled, sunlight catching in his hair. Coal grazed nearby, calm, unbothered, as if the land itself knew the danger had passed. May called softly, "Did you sleep?" He turned with a tired smile, like a man who doesn't have to look over his shoulder. They shared coffee by the porch rail, steam curling between them. The quiet felt different now, lighter, no longer edged with fear. Down the road, the tracks from the marshal's wagon were already half erased by melting snow. "Marshal Hayes left before dawn," Jonah said. "Took Silas with him. Folks in town came by to thank us, if you can believe that." May stirred her cup, watching the ripples settle. The world turns fast once justice moves. Jonah glanced toward the horizon, fast enough to forget the ones who fought for it. She reached over, touched his arm. "Not this time." Inside, the fire burned low but steady. The hymn book still sat open on the table, its pages bent from use. Jonah picked it up, tracing the familiar verse, "The frost shall not claim me." His voice was stronger now when he read it. "Feels different saying it after you've lived it." May smiled. "That's what faith is, Jonah. You survive it before you understand it." He closed the book gently, then met Shata, her eyes. "You know, there's something I need to tell you." She waited. He exhaled. "When Silas came that first time, I was ready to sell every head of cattle I owned. I thought losing it all would still be better than losing you." May's chest tightened. "You would have given everything?" He nodded. "And I still would. But it's better this way. You and me both standing, no one owing the other." She couldn't speak for a moment. The words came thick. "You didn't just save me, Jonah. You gave me back the right to choose who I am." Outside, the sunlight sharpened, turning the snowfields into silver. The last gusts of winter rattled the windows and moved on. That afternoon, as May folded laundry near the hearth, she felt a sharp pull in her belly. Then nothing, just warmth spreading beneath her ribs. A flutter, faint and new. She sat down slowly, hands pressed to her lap, eyes wide. When Jonah came in, brushing dirt from his palms, she whispered, almost afraid to speak it aloud. "I think—" He froze. "May?" "I think there's life," she said, voice trembling. "Not hope, not faith. Life." Jonah crossed the room in 2 strides. He knelt beside her, one hand steadying hers. "You're sure?" She laughed softly through tears. "No, but I want to be." He smiled, quiet, disbelieving joy. "Then we'll wait and see together." The words hung there, fragile as the thaw. He kissed her forehead, lingering. When he drew back, he saw the way the light caught her face, calm, radiant, like the land in spring's first breath. That night, while the fire dwindled, the world outside seemed to hold still. The mere thistle stirred in the barn, a restless sound in the dark. Then, just before midnight, the cry came, high, startled, alive. May and Jonah ran out barefoot into the cold. In the lantern's glow they saw it, a small, trembling foal, still slick with birth, legs folding under the weight of newness. May dropped to her knees beside it, laughter and tears spilling together. She made it, Jonah whispered. May stroked the foal's damp neck. She did, and so did we. The horse nuzzled the newborn close, and the night settled back into its rhythm. The drip of snowmelt, the soft nickering of beasts, the slow pulse of the earth returning to warmth. Jonah put an arm around May's shoulders, pulling her close. "You see," he said softly, "the world still knows how to start over." She leaned into him, eyes fixed on the fragile creature rising to its feet. "So do we." They stood there until the cold found their skin again, then walked back inside. The house glowed amber through the frosted glass, alive with the sound of the fire's crackle. May turned once before closing the door, watching the steam rise from the barn roof into the starlit dark. It looked like a prayer leaving one life to bless another. The snow began to rot at the edges of the fields, shrinking into thin veins of silver that ran between tufts of dead grass. The air carried that heavy, wet scent of mud and thaw, the smell of work waiting. May Ellis stepped outside at dawn, shawl tight around her shoulders, breath curling in soft clouds. From the barn came the low, steady rhythm of life, Thistle stamping gently, her foal nuzzling at her side. Jonah Hale was already there, sleeves rolled, planing a piece of cedar along the porch rail. His hands moved slow, certain, the shavings falling like curls of sunlight to the floor. "Wood's soft this year," he said, glancing up. "Spring'll come fast." May smiled faintly. "So will the work." "That's what keeps us breathing," he said. He didn't tell her he was carving something special, but when she brought him coffee later, she saw the outline of a cradle taking shape, smooth, rounded, gentle at the edges. He didn't look up as he worked, and she didn't speak of it. Some things were better built in silence. Days passed the way thaw turns to mud, slow, certain, unavoidable. May moved through them with the rhythm of habit, tending the stove, brushing thistle, folding linens she'd mended a dozen times. Her body felt heavier, quieter. Some mornings she woke with a pulse beneath her ribs, faint and curious. Nora Pike stopped by one afternoon, cheeks red from the wind. "You look pale," she said, setting down a jar of pickled beans. May shrugged. "Just tired." Nora's gaze lingered on her. Tired can mean a lot of things. May only smiled, deflecting with practiced grace. "You'd know, mother of four." Nora chuckled but didn't press. Before leaving, she glanced at the half-carved cradle by the window. "He's making room for something, isn't he?" May looked at the cradle, then down at her hands. "Maybe for what we both forgot we could hope for." That night, she couldn't sleep. The wind had softened into a sighing breeze that moved through the grass like breath. Jonah lay beside her, arm heavy across her waist, his breathing deep and even. She slipped from bed and stood by the window, watching the stars shimmer in puddles where the snow had melted. The earth was dark and alive again. Her reflection in the glass looked softer than she remembered. Less widow, more woman. Her palms rested against the curve of her abdomen, where warmth had begun to gather like a secret fire. Behind her, Jonah stirred. May? She turned, smiling. Couldn't sleep. Something wrong? She shook her head. No, just listening. To what? The quiet. It's different now. He reached for her hand, tugging her back into bed. Quiet's only worth something when it's shared, he murmured. She rested her head against his shoulder, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. Outside, a whip-poor-will called from the thawing woods, a sound she hadn't heard since before Thomas died. She closed her eyes and let it echo through her, gentle and strange. When morning came, the first wildflowers pushed through the thaw. Jonah worked by the barn, humming tunelessly as he sanded the cradle smooth. His reading had improved. Each evening, he practiced verses from the hymn book, slow and careful, the words now more music than struggle. May watched from the doorway, hands folded over the swell just beginning beneath her dress. She hadn't said it aloud yet, not even to herself. But when Jonah turned and smiled, she saw the knowing already there in his eyes. Got a name picked out? He asked lightly, as though asking about the weather. She laughed, a quiet, breathless sound. You shouldn't guess. I don't have to, he said. Some things you just know. He brushed the sawdust from his hands and looked at the sky, high, blue, and unbroken. World's turning new again, May. I can feel it. And she did too. In the smell of cedar, in the warmth of sunlight on the boards, in the stillness that followed the long winter's fight. That evening, they sat on the porch watching the horizon fade from gold to violet. Jonah rested his hand over hers, both warm, both certain. Neither spoke, but the silence between them said what words couldn't. That after so much waiting, life had begun again. Not with thunder, but with peace. At dawn, May woke to the taste of copper and earth in her mouth, that strange mix of fear and wonder. She rose, stepped to the basin, and splashed her face with cold water. When she looked up, her cheeks were flushed, her pulse unsteady. Outside, the first rain of spring began to fall. Soft, steady, patient. She pressed a hand to her belly, felt the smallest flutter beneath her palm, and smiled through tears. Spring arrived like a secret kept too long, unfurling slow, gentle, and sure. The last of the snow receded into the gullies, trickling toward the river that finally ran free again, laughing in silver ripples under the sun. Across the wide plains of Montana, buds broke through black soil, and every gust of wind smelled faintly of sap and promise. Inside the small ranch house, May Ellis stirred awake to the sound of water dripping from the eaves and birds quarreling in the willows. For the first time in months, she didn't flinch at the sound of wind. It was soft now, carrying warmth instead of warning. She sat up slowly, the quilt sliding from her shoulders, one hand instinctively resting on the curve of her belly, a habit she no longer tried to hide. The room was filled with the muted glow of dawn. Dust motes drifted like pale embers in the slanting light. She could hear Jonah hail outside, his voice low and calm as he spoke to the horses. Thistle whinnied, answered by her foal's higher, eager cry. May smiled to herself. She'd come to love those sounds, the ordinary, steadfast rhythms of life continuing without permission. She moved to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass. The world beyond shimmered in soft green and gold. Jonah was mending a fence post, coat off, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, skin browned by the pale spring sun. His movements were unhurried, patient, the kind of patience learned from losing and surviving. He paused once to wipe his brow and caught her watching from the window. For a moment, they simply looked at each other through the bright air, no words needed. Later, when he came in, the smell of cedar oil followed him. He carried the finished cradle, polished smooth, its curves gleaming honey-colored in the light. He set it gently beside her chair near the hearth, the same chair where she'd mended clothes and prayed through long winters. "It's done," he said, almost shyly. May reached out, fingers tracing the carved edge. Along the rim, he'd etched cottonwood leaves, each one unique, delicate as breath. At the center, burned into the wood, with a careful hand, were 3 words. "For our spring." She felt her throat tighten. "Jonah, it's perfect." He smiled, eyes soft. "Didn't know how to write much, but I figured I could still make something that speaks." "You did," she whispered. "More than words ever could." He reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. "You should rest more. Doc's orders, or Nora's at least." May chuckled. "Nora's not a doctor." "Feels like one," he said, sitting beside her. "She's been by twice a week, just to scold me for letting you lift the kettle." May leaned against him, the warmth of his body steady, grounding. "She means well." "She means loud," he corrected, and she laughed. A low, easy laugh that felt like sunlight breaking open inside her. That afternoon, Nora Pike arrived again, as if conjured by their words. She rode up with her skirts tucked high and her basket rattling against the saddle. "Soup," she called before even reaching the porch. "And word from town." Jonah opened the door, grinning. "You move faster than the mail." "Quicker and cheaper, too," Nora said, brushing the dust from her gloves. "Silas Blackthorn's trial came through. Guilty on all counts. He's bound for Joliet." May felt a strange stillness settle inside her. Part relief, part disbelief. "So it's finished," she murmured. Nora nodded. "Finished proper. You can stop looking over your shoulder now." Jonah poured her coffee while May stirred the soup. The 3 of them ate in easy silence, punctuated only by the ticking of the clock and the faint hum of bees through the open window. When Nora left at sunset, she hugged May tight and whispered, "You've got everything you need now. Just keep it alive." May stood on the porch watching her friend disappear down the trail, the setting sun throwing gold across the hills. The air was heavy with the smell of lilac and warm wood. Jonah stepped behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "Everything's quieter now," he said. May smiled faintly. "Almost too quiet." "Then maybe it's time we filled it with something new." That evening, the house glowed with the color of honey. The fire crackled soft, not out of necessity, but for comfort. Jonah sat at the table with the hymn book open, tracing each line with the same care he gave his fences. He'd learned to read now, not quickly, not perfectly, but steadily. He looked up and caught May watching him from the rocker. "You still remember the line that carried us through?" he asked. She nodded. "The frost shall not claim me." He smiled, his voice quiet but certain. "Guess we proved that true." May's gaze softened. "We didn't beat the winter, Jonah. We outlasted it." He reached across the table, took her hand. "Same thing in the end." They sat like that as the sky turned violet, the faint hum of the river threading through the open door. The foal outside gave a soft, uncertain cry, and Thistle answered with a low murmur, mother calling child, patient and sure. Later that night, the moon rose, round and pale, casting silver light across the fields. Jonah lit the lantern on the porch, the same one that had burned through every storm and silence before. Its warm glow spilled over the cradle by the window, over the wood grain smooth as skin, over the gentle curve of May's stomach as she rested in the chair nearby. She watched the flame dance, its reflection caught in Jonah's eyes. "You ever think about how far we came?" she asked. He leaned against the post, the lantern's light haloing his face. "Every time I see you breathe." May looked down at her belly, the faintest kick pressing against her hand. "He's restless tonight." Jonah grinned. "Like his father." She laughed softly. "Or stubborn like his mother." The baby kicked again, stronger this time, and both of them fell quiet. The sound of night folded around them. The chorus of frogs, the creak of trees, the gentle murmur of water against stone. Life, simple and unremarkable, yet whole. Jonah knelt before her, resting a calloused palm over the curve of her stomach. His voice was low, rough-edged. "By winter, you carried my son," he said, the old vow breaking open with new meaning. "But you gave him spring." May's eyes filled, her fingers brushing through his hair. "You gave me the courage to bloom again." He looked up at her, a small smile ghosting across his lips. "Then we'll keep blooming, one season at a time." Before dawn, the first real rain of spring began to fall, soft and steady. May woke to its rhythm and stepped barefoot onto the porch. The world glistened, washed clean. The lantern still burned faintly, its light mingling with the gray of morning. Jonah followed, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, his hands settling over hers. In the distance, the river shone like a ribbon of light, cutting through fields ready for planting. Thistle and her foal moved along the fence line, their bodies sleek and strong. May turned to Jonah, her voice barely above the rain. "Do you hear it?" He tilted his head. "What?" "Time 400 memos. The sound of everything starting over." Jonah nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "That's what spring sounds like." They stood together, the rain soft against their skin, the air full of the smell of life returning. And when the first streak of sunlight broke through the clouds, It caught on the cradle inside the house, turning the carved leaves to gold. That morning, the plains shone wide and open, and the house on the ridge stood quiet but alive. Its roof strong, its walls warm, its rooms breathing with new life. Inside, May and Jonah held each other in the stillness that comes only when the storms are done. No one left. No one was lost. And for the first time in years, the land and the hearts that lived on it were whole. As the last light fades over the Montana plains, we leave May and Jonah beneath the soft hush of spring. Two souls who learn that love isn't thunder or fire, but the quiet work of showing up day after day. Their story reminds us that healing doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes, it's in the steady hands that mend a roof, the voice that reads a single line out loud, or the faith that blooms again after a long winter. If this tale of courage, forgiveness, and second chances touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Did it remind you of someone you once loved, or a season in your own life when hope returned? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Your stories mean more than you know. And if you'd like more journeys like this one, stories of endurance, tenderness, and the quiet power of love that lasts, be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the little bell icon so you never miss another evening by the fire with us. Thank you, dear friends, for riding along. Until next time, keep your lanterns lit and your hearts open to the warmth.